Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug
Our
Sharp.
co-host Rich Gear here with you, and we have a couple of guests here this morning, Doug. Dan and Teresa back from Sudan, and a lot of exciting adventures. South Sudan, yeah, let's get that crowd. So we're really excited to have you here and tell us about some of the stuff you're doing, and what are you doing?
Well, we know that Dan has given me an opportunity to work on a project.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that I can complete it and in a reasonable amount of time, because they need a unit on evolution in South Sudan, and to do it in such a discrete way that appears to be objective is a bit of a challenge, because all you have to do is present a little bit of the evidence that we have, and already you're going to get in trouble with the people who are evolutionists. So,
is there a lot of those people over there? I mean, I guess I was thinking that they weren't as hostile as we are here in more developed countries. They are, maybe?
Well, I think
because here it's really bad
throughout
education.
the world, wherever you go, when you get into the higher echelons of university, the evolution is kind of taken as fact, and then
even over there.
Yeah, Christianity is kind of a sideline, or creation is kind of a sideline thing that's taught in the religious studies, and the two aren't expected to kind of correlate, and that's really a problem.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry,
yeah, what I have seen is that people who are Christians there and teachers, and they have university education, they're really at odds with their own beliefs, and they are longing for a way to reconcile their faith with the university education that they've received. And so they've been educated in the secular environment, and they have Christian faith, but the two seem to clash the way that they've been educated. And of course, it's just because they have a lack of all the evidence.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm a little bit backward myself in the sense, because I'm thinking South Sudan was fairly primitive as far as what is going on there. I thought it was kind of like they broke off from the northern part because of the Islam and Christian ideas in the first place. I didn't even realize there was a big university. Did they get taught in university in Sudan or in other countries? Or is it both?
There's a number of universities in South Sudan.
I didn't know that. So,
and then some people have been educated in Kenya or Uganda and things. And so the challenge is that a lot of the resources available in a lot of East Africa haven't been able to keep up to date with what's going on, and especially in these scientific areas.
Now, I've taken a look at the materials that you sent me that came from, I think, Uganda and from Kenya. And I said to myself, boy, this evidence that they're presenting here is so out of date that it dates from the 50s and 60s.
Oh, no.
And they're using things like Haeckel's embryos and some really
they're still using that? Oh my God.
Horus series and a lot of the really outdated arguments that you wouldn't have expected to see. Even
evolutionists don't use them anymore,
Right. So
unless they get away with it.
If we can actually present something that's really up to date and show them that the evidence that we now have is so much more powerful in favor of creation, we have an opportunity here to maybe make a real difference. And what I started out with, I started out with explaining foundational stuff, like how to logically think through things, what fallacies are, and so people don't understand what logical thinking should be.
Right.
And so I then I've written one piece of the unit, which is the origin of life from non-life, and the chemical experiments that were done. And this was if you get this foundationally and understand that you can't even begin to get there from a chemical standpoint, then that really trumps any other evidence that comes along with like in genetics and mutations and natural selection. I will all deal with all these different things, but these are, if the powerful evidence from the chemical evolution stuff, I think is going to really make an impact. And that's what made an impact on me. It's my testimony that this is what convinced me without a shadow of doubt that the creation biblical account actually makes sense. And it made, I said, there had to be a God because this could not have come about by chance.
Doug, you said that this was an opportunity to make an impact, and I think that we cannot overstate what an opportunity it is, because it's more than just one school in South Sudan. We're talking about influencing the curriculum for the whole country, but then because the teaching methodology that this curriculum is based on is poised to be the most up-to-date modern teaching methods in all of East Africa, it's quite possible that neighboring countries like Kenya and Uganda, that currently South Sudan is modeling their education off from Kenya-Uganda curriculum, if we get a really excellent curriculum model built in South Sudan, it's very likely that we could become the standard for education in East Africa, and Kenya and Uganda could then be turning to the South Sudan curriculum.
How comprehensive is this curriculum supposed to be? Is it covering all the aspects? You're dealing with what? You're dealing with chemical, chemistry. You're dealing with. Are you dealing with? Obviously, you're dealing with biology, astronomy.
Well, not so much astronomy.
Okay.
It's mostly the biological evolution piece. The next unit I'm going to work on, the piece of it will be the genetics, and explaining Gregor Mendel and his faith a little bit, maybe about it, and then talking about how genetics really is taking off now, currently, with the discovery of epigenetics, which is the switching on and switching off of genes to express or take away certain characteristics based upon the need for variety that's built into the genome. And the variety is part of what God built into his kingdom. No two people are alike, no two creatures are alike. They are all unique because that's what God wants, is to create distinct creatures. And so being able to understand how the genetics work is going to be a powerful way to show that God is creator and how he works.
What are you going to do with deal with paleontology and that kind of stuff? Is that going to be part of it, or is that later on? Where's that not part of it?
The fossil record.
Fossil record, yeah.
Fossil record.
Geology?
I'll probably talk about radioisotope dating a little bit, because it's critical to talk about the concept of deep time and how it really doesn't work. And so that's, that's a big project. It's something that I've got to put a lot of thought into.
Can you put a piece of it at a time, or do you have to have it all done before you do anything?
If you take what is in what we got from Kenya, they just touch on the surface of it.
Right.
The problem is how do you reduce it down to something that's manageable?
That's what I was
because
getting
there's
at.
so much stuff that we
Right.
can put in here that would really be a powerful way to teach biology and.
But don't you think, Doug? What levels classes are you talking about? What?
12th grade.
But this is the
9th through
secondary
12th.
education,
Okay.
9th through 12th grade. And it's the entire curriculum that's being written. You see, when South Sudan was founded as a new nation in 2011, they didn't have their own Ministry of Education.
Right.
And Dan and I have been working closely with the curriculum department at the Ministry of Education. When I say closely, every time we're in Juba, we stop in and we see those guys. And I tell you, they're some of the hardest working people in all of the South Sudan government, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As a person who loves education, that's probably, I'm a little biased, but.
Okay. We'll let that slide.
Right, yeah. They've written such a beautiful framework for teaching methodology, and the reason why that's necessary is because there's not enough teachers, and the classrooms are so overcrowded. And so when you have 80 ninth graders in a classroom and one teacher, your teaching methods are quite limited. And the guys in the curriculum department recognize that currently teachers basically lecture, students memorize, then they repeat.
It's by rote.
Right, and so instead what they've wanted to do is to create some group work, interactive, where students are examining materials and then learning from one another, and it's a discovering model of education and with a lot of group emphasis. This is a completely different teaching method, and so we can have beautiful curriculum too, but we also have to look at teacher training and teacher education, because we have to, what is the current belief system of all these teachers? They're torn, they have their Christian faith, most of them, many of them, but then they have this outdated university education.
Well, it seems to me that would be an opportunity if you could have like seminars or training sessions for the new curriculum, and then you can get into a little more in-depth things that maybe wouldn't be presented to a 12th grader, but to a college-educated grad, you could say, hey, there's more to this than even the part we're going to teach here. The idea, the concepts for, do you know the difference between variety and, between, macro and micro evolution? Do you know the difference between, fundamentally, one adds something that wasn't there, and the other one just changes what was already there? Epigenetic type of ideas. Based on I'm saying that would be an idea for maybe a seminar, and this will give you it's kind of like the iceberg approach. You see the 10% up here, that goes what gets taught, but down here there's this 80% or 90% underneath that's there that bucks them up.
Fundamentals.
One of the things I think is important to include in this is some of the things that will make an impact on the country as a whole, such as conservation methods and agriculture methods and things of that sort, where they can actually take what you learn in a practical sense and apply it to their current way of life, so that they can use that sort of thing. And I've been thinking about this for what we do, is to perhaps take, instead of having a pure creationist approach in our area, take and how do we practically apply it to like conservation or and making it or environmental things, being able to show how taking the knowledge we receive from our Creator and use it in such a way that was originally intended in the beginning. This is what God asked Adam and Eve to do when he started out in the Garden of Eden. He was supposed to tend the garden. Well, if we don't know how to do that, and with some of the things that we've had problems with in our environment, it's because we have not handled those issues properly.
Well, Dan, it seems like that'd be part of what you would be interested in doing, because you've been involved in agriculture and all kinds of plant growth and different type of things for years. Are you teaching? Are you showing them methods and stuff like that?
We're definitely, a lot of the methodology is providing some alternatives to use of tools that aren't there right now. The tractors are getting less and less every year because there's not money to maintain them. There's not the skill to maintain them, and
infrastructures.
And so the whole use of of machines is kind of imploding in on itself as the country is kind of becoming more and more impoverished through the economic crisis. So we're looking more at various types of no-till, minimum tillage methods, using raised beds to keep the things out of the flood zone. Those kinds of technologies, and market gardening, higher value, moving away from subsistence to actually generating higher levels of income through market gardening or intercropping your vegetables between your agronomic crops. these types of things can transition people into making more money, and with making more money, there can be more opportunities for ministry and in the local
And maybe
church.
buying a machine or two, or getting somebody that trained to be a mechanic or two or something.
We love practicum in every aspect of our school. And in our school, every student has their own garden plot. And we help them sell their vegetables, and they actually receive income after from their garden plots. But then we take practicum in other subjects too. And this coming year, we're opening our science lab, biology lab, chemistry lab, physics lab, and computer lab. And to my knowledge, we will be the first high school in all of South Sudan that will have these labs to have the practicums. Then we even take other subjects like the social sciences, and we have a weekly debate time. The students love to debate. It's great practice for their English. Then they can also take the things that they've learned in other social science classes and put those into the debate subjects. And
is that their national language? Is English or their national language? I know they probably have tribal languages, I would assume.
Yeah.
Most of Africa is like that, but is English like the official, like country language? Okay, I wasn't sure about that. But they basically still much more conversant with their own tribal tongue, right?
Yeah, their mother tongue is, there's 65 different tribal languages.
That's what I was getting at.
And they begin education in their tribal language is how it's designed to go. And then by the time they get to 7th grade, all education is done in English.
Interesting,
Yeah.
okay.
One of the things I want to emphasize too, as people are watching this show, is that every skill is needed in South Sudan. We're really trying to get the word out there that we need help with developing this strategic opportunity in education. It's not just something that we as a small group here could do by ourselves. We need other people getting involved, and every skill is needed because South Sudan is starting out from the lowest basic foundation, being a new country and being just coming out of 60 years of on and off again civil war, about the longest in the whole world. In modern times.
60 years,
yeah.
Wow. That probably messed up the entire infrastructure that was even potential there. That would have
Right. Well, you can imagine a country with no paved roads and no electrical grid and very little understanding of disease and sanitation.
I'm just surprised some of these big multimillionaires wouldn't say like, man, there's an opportunity to really not only help but also do very well for themselves, because I mean you get ground floor. Of course, ground floor is hard. It really is.
Well, the stability of not knowing whether your people can be there one month and then a civil war or some rebel thing happen and then have to move out.
They're still working with some of that stuff.
Yeah. So
I thought it's kind of like aftershock. Just because you got your own country doesn't mean there aren't internal squabbles part time. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why it hasn't drawn. Now we have some friends amongst the Israelis who are there, and they're doing a good job with helping with development and trying to do large scale agriculture.
It's a country in transition between that time of relief and then looking forward to the time of development, and it's a very delicate transition to make from relief and aid then to development of the infrastructure of the country.
Because the whole country is enmeshed in a tremendous amount of dependency, and aid money comes in, and people become more dependent on it. And
you're trying to show them how to do it for themselves. The old thing, it's better to you feed somebody, they eat for a day, if you teach them how to
teach to fish.
Teach them how to fish, then they'll eat for a lifetime. Yeah, and then teach them how to do that fishing for themselves. Yeah.
And you consider that the World Food Program's coming in and reaching these displaced person camps inside and outside the country. And if you have 30-40% of the population that's not in the fields farming and they're in displaced person camps, that's a real stress on the country.
Yeah.
And it's a stress on the international.
Well, how do you get them out of there so they can get into they got to be trained, or just why are they?
They need to feel safe.
Is that what it is? Okay.
They need to feel safe.
It's hard after 60
been a long
years.
time. Yeah, it is very hard to know when is it okay to go home. And we're committed to working in the rural communities because we think that the future of the country is in the rural communities rather than in the towns and in the cities.
At this point, that would be true, yeah.
But you've had some success in talking with the Ministry of Education, and they're open to the type of thing that we are proposing to do here?
We're working on it because there's no guarantee of success in this, but if we're presenting objective factual information and we can bringing this forward and saying and comparing to what the other country's information is coming out with and it's not factual, then when we keep making these comparisons, we've got to gain some ground. We've got to pray.
Well, even secular universities teach about that spontaneous generation is impossible. I don't think they really understand how contradictory it is when they start teaching the evolutionary lesson, because
Exactly.
you know,
the evolutionists has basically given up on the chemical evolution to
Yeah,
yeast. They
I mean-
say, well, that's not evolution. We're not even talking about that.
But then how do you get from here to here?
They,
You know what I'm saying?
basically punted on that whole issue, and they
Yeah.
don't realize it.
Once you do that, yeah, it seems to me you're right, Doug. I mean, that your chemical thing is, but spontaneous generation is. I mean, even the secularists teach you that's impossible. And then they blindly just forget about it when they go to the evolutionary lesson.
They don't have an
But
explanation for it.
I think, Doug, when you talk about teaching them how to think, say, well, what conclusions do you draw out of this? Maybe
Right.
from the next part of it. You know.
Yeah, I got a little section on little fallacies like begging the question and chronological snobbery and a few other little things like that, where you talk about how the people use faulty thinking to come to their conclusions, and the evolutionists' arguments all fall into these categories. And it's basically trying to understand how the devil thinks, so that you can show them how it sort
Three
of
screw
works.
tape letters.
Right.
That's how to detect deception. And there's a whole lot of that is going on in the education system.
Detect pseudoscience.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And people accuse us of us not being scientific. Well, I would tend to say, well, take a look at our arguments here and figure out who's being unscientific, because what we have is really very powerful in terms of examining the evidence and coming up with a logical explanation for it.
What would you consider if you in the list of top 10, the things you're most proud of, or the things that you've really done that you feel good about, or you feel potentially really have the biggest going to happen and you think might going to happen soon, you know?
Oh, wow.
That's a big list, I know. I mean, I just blindsided them right here, but I do this to Doug all the time. They're not used to it, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, one of the things is the market prices are very high there. So if we can switch over from subsistence agriculture to supplying the market, we can not only supply the market to Boer, but we've got the Nile River, which can be, even though the roads are bad, the Nile River can continuously supply to the Juba market. And the Juba market is very, very high. Almost all the food that's in South Sudan is coming from outside the country. Very little is produced locally. So there's tremendous opportunity. So as we look at raised beds that can be put anywhere in the country in a huge, huge Nile floodplain, South Sudan, in my estimation, in a humble estimation, is capable of feeding the rest of Africa, because there's about 20 million acres of on-farm land. Only 1 or 2% of the land is the fertile land in South Sudan. Some of the most fertile land in the whole world is farmed. And so, tremendous opportunity. So we look at that opportunity, and
that would be kind of go back to your people in the displaced camps, and they get some of those laborers. Literally, this is a literal one. Like Jesus said, the harvest is ripe and the laborers are few right now.
That's
You need laborers right now to do that, especially if you're doing unmachined stuff. You need a lot more manual hands to be doing things. And how do you get them to feel safe? I mean, so they would come out. Is it just slowly chipping away at it and it's been stable for several years now, and you get a few being able. There's always got to be a few adventurers that are willing to start the thing, and then they do well, and then other ones go, well, man, I'm going to get in on this, you know.
Yeah, Dan really focuses on the Nehemiah principle of being aware and being on guard and working at the same time. You don't, just because there's insecurity, you don't withdraw and stop all the work.
No, I guess, that's good. Yeah.
So he teaches out of Nehemiah quite a lot.
So you're going to build a wall?
I'd like to build some roads.
Yeah, how would you do? How would you build roads on that? That's a
Well,
big
we've been
job.
working on that aspect of it, and some of it's just the way that the vehicle passage is governed. Some of it's the communities themselves being able to subdivide their work and keep their area, access area roads in repair, and even taking clumps of grass and filling in the potholes and
Are they mainly dirt roads then, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
there's about 30 miles of pavement all in the capital city, in the whole country. I mean,
Wow.
about 30 miles of pavement, and that's it.
That's it, huh?
So it's
Okay.
all dirt roads.
From what I understand, during more peaceful times in the past, they were actually able to keep the roads up, and they worked together. But since the international communities come in, now they look to the international community to do all this stuff for
That's the
them.
dependency you're talking
And
about.
so if they could go back to originally how they did it themselves, and they maintained the roads fairly well in the past, they need to go back to that.
Problem is, you got 60 years, and you've lost 2 generations, maybe 3.
Exactly.
There's a break in that knowledge of the people who used to do it, or most of them are dead or definitely very old.
Yeah.
And they might be able to share some things, but wouldn't be able to do it themselves.
Now, we
That's
just
the real
got
difficult.
about a minute here.
Wow,
What would
that's
be
went
the
fast.
what would be the biggest challenge that you faced?
Wow, there's the one that has a lot of different things, and I think what we're really trying to do is to create something that can be replicated and sustained
Right.
after we leave. We need to create something that they'll continue to run with.
Self-replicates.
Yeah,
snowballs.
and as not only sustaining, but able to grow. And really, the biggest challenge that we have right now, I see, is the economic insecurity in the country. The inflation, is just through the roof, and it's really hard to work in that, and it's hard for everybody.
Yeah, it's just hard enough when you're already poverty, a country that's kind of at the low end, and then inflation's going, so you're getting squished from, you're down here, and
Exactly.
how do even people eat, You got to teach them how to farm.
How to farm, right?
You have to teach them.
Agriculture is definitely
That's key at
a
this
key
point,
to
yeah.
the future.
Yeah, that's what builds a country to start with. Everything else is built on that anyway.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think you're right. You got to.
We have a goal too of transforming the ideology of the worldview of the people, not to just focus on helping their own families, but to focus on the broader picture of compassion and love of Christ, of helping everybody in the surrounding communities to help them and move ahead economically, spiritually, and in their health practices and sanitation. And so when that becomes the focus, then the country will develop. And they will go out and they will do ministry to even reaching other tribes and heal those long-term divisions between them.
Okay.
If you want to find out a little bit more about Dan and Teresa's ministry, you can contact us on our website, www.rae.org, or jansonsjourney.com. Is that it?
Yeah.
And this would be a way that you could possibly help them continue their ministry with the South Sudanese.
We'll put this up on the screen, right?
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.